Good afternoon, no, good morning, and welcome to second edition of Metaplanet Roundtable, Metaplanet Roundtable 2, which is coming out every Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. PST. I'm very excited for this panel today because it's an absolute rock star panel. There is so much signal and alpha on the screen right here. So I'm looking at the chat. I'm not getting any messages from chat. I don't know if we are actually working live here or not, but I have to presume we are because there is 160 live viewers. I want to go straight to just really give the mic to you guys, and why don't we start with you, Climb? Just welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for giving this signal to the Metaplanet crew. I want to hear your thoughts on this new capital plan and also where you are right now in your thesis of how that might play out for Metaplanet, the stock, and amount of Bitcoin and all of that. Climb, why don't we start with you? How you doing, brother? And what's on your mind?
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me on. It's, I was thinking they'd probably do like a 420 million plan. Since they did the 210 and 60 trading days, and it takes a little while, a couple of weeks sort of to set these things up, it seems. So I'm glad that they went over 420. And like, I can't wait for the one after that. It looks like, at the end of this, they may end up with 50 to 100,000 Bitcoin, and that could happen at the end of this year, actually. And, I'm expecting higher prices personally.
Yeah, and I think no doubt of that. But when you're thinking like the level of execution, the speed of the flywheel at Metaplanet that Dylan and Simon are pulling off, how do you see what's your conservative estimate on how that will affect the stock price this year? Like where
I
could we
haven't
go?
Yeah, I haven't updated my model yet. I need to. I think that, the numbers that, I was estimating before were really, really sandbagged, and I tried to communicate that as well as I could. I wouldn't rule out something like $50 this year. That's sort of ballpark where I see the trajectory going, sort of near the end of this plan, I guess I could say.
So you think this plan they'll be able to pull it off this year, all of it?
Yeah, the first 11 trading days of May, they sold 101 million shares. That's 11 consecutive trading days. 101 million shares. That's almost a fifth of the size, almost 20% of this plan in 11 trading days. So I think 6 or 7 months is going to be pretty good.
Sounds good. Ryan, what's your and Climb? I know you're usually conservative, so I'll take that 50 as a conservative target, which I'm fine with. Ryan, what's your thoughts on the capital plan and how this is playing out?
Yeah, so I think I've been amazed by Metaplanet from the start. I'm very much looking forward to getting more context on the 555 plan. But the way they've been able to raise cash from the moving strike warrants and, ordinary bonds borrowing money at 0%, this whole thing has gone way faster than I ever would have expected in terms of their Bitcoin growth, their Bitcoin per share growth. So I'm kind of just like sitting back, enjoying the ride, and just watching the global east of the MicroStrategy playbook just rise way faster than I ever would have projected.
I love it. And why is it that they can spin the wheel faster than Sailor and Strategy in US? What's going on?
Well, it's that's an interesting question. So a lot of this stuff does come down to like base effect math. The Bitcoin yield KPI is absolutely going to favor the smaller starting point. And this comes back to one of my main points around the Metaplanet thesis is that there is a very interesting Japan-specific story. Like MicroStrategy has never done ordinary bonds, right? It was convertible bonds, it was ATMs. Now we're shifting towards preferred securities. So the ability to be able to just borrow money at 0% for 5+ years is really incredible. Also, they've really have an efficient moving strike warrant program in place in that they never sell on the down days. They have to only sell on the up days. So yeah, I think that unique Japan investor dynamics plays a big part here.
Nice. Thank you, Ryan. Adam, napalm of X, the Metaplanet napalm word bombs on X. How you doing, and what's your thoughts on this?
Hey, good morning, guys. Thanks so much for having me on, Anders. Really appreciate it. My thoughts on it are changing every 2 days because of how fast this is moving. And, it's just so funny to see like that I'll work a few hours just doing some modeling, some price projections, and then I'll have what I think is conservative that ends up being a bullish number to the public. Like I was projecting at a 150K base price of BTC, assuming like a 7% monthly dilution rate with an close to equal MNAV, you're talking a stock price in the $40 to $50 range, but that was based on the previous capital plan. And that's by the end of this year. So it's really fascinating to see how fast they're moving. And there's so many unknowns that we're trying to model in. We're not even talking about how much money that they could raise in the US. They obviously have a $250 million goal. That said, does anybody believe they're only going to be able to raise that much? And how fast can they do it? It's just going to invite so much interest with the NASDAQ listing. There's so many things that are happening at the speed of light. It's tough to just organize it all. And I think that this is the most exciting stock in the world. What Ryan said just then, just about being the small, nimble player, the potential is massive. So I'm super excited. Thanks for having me here. Really tough to see where this is going to be, but I am bullish, as you can all probably tell.
No, yeah, absolutely. I think all of us are here. And also our dear Brian, who not only shares a lot of signal on X, but also have lived in Japan. And last Tuesday you were here, and I loved how your knowledge of Japan, like for instance, that in their culture, they prefer to buy local. I think that's important and valuable signal. Welcome, Brian, and awesome to have you back.
Thanks. Yeah, I think the new plan's pretty exciting. The original target for this year was 10,000 Bitcoin. Obviously, if they could get to 50,000 Bitcoin, or if that number is sandbagged, then they could potentially get to even 100,000 Bitcoin this year. Obviously, that's going to have some pretty serious implications for price. And they put out some numbers last week showing that, I'm not sure exactly what time frame it was looking at, if it was just a day, if it was the whole week, but Metaplanet alone accounted for 70% of the trading volume in the entire market. At least within their trading segment in Japan. So if they can keep that up, that is a lot of trading volume to sell shares into without moving the price too much. So I couldn't be any more bullish on the stock at this point. And I think, there's just so much potential here. It's really hard to say where they're going to end up the year, but I think it's going to be good one way or another.
And guys, I'm very happy when Brian is sharing something here. One of you else, like we've been around the table now. If you want to play off of some of the things he said, like just grab the mic and add your opinion. That's what we're here for. Climb. I mean, if we go to you first, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, but to me, it just looks like, I love strategy. I didn't sell any strategy to buy Metaplanet. I think preferred stocks are going to help strategy kill it and raise the BTC yield drastically in the second half. But it's almost like, it looks like it's going in slow motion when you're comparing it to Metaplanet. Climb.
Yeah, my sort of, within a couple of days of getting in, my original sort of gut feeling intuition was, I think Metaplanet from, late April could at least 10x their Bitcoin per share. And that was sort of my initial thing that I couldn't get out of my head. And, comparing that to larger companies, that would be hard or impossible to do in Bitcoin terms, at least. You can always make more dollars, but in Bitcoin. So that's really why I pulled the trigger, and then I just kept going in heavier over a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Yes, you did. You did go heavy, and it's really thanks to all of that your research early on. I think basically in April that opened up the trade, the idea of investing in Metaplanet to the rest of us. You did a lot of work there. Ryan, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this a little bit recently, and I've always been a student and a fan and an admirer of Stanley Druckenmiller. And one of his big one of his big theories on, how to manage money is to put all your eggs into one basket and watch the basket very closely. For me, that basket is Bitcoin treasury companies. Now, the barrier to entry for me is quite high. I would have had no problem staying in just MicroStrategy for multiple decades, let's call it. But then there was just a really special, unique story coming out of Japan. And I think when we start talking about like pricing MicroStrategy in Metaplanet or vice versa, that's really a tough comparison, right? Because one is the biggest holder of Bitcoin, that MicroStrategy is just at a different stage in the company's growth. The market cap really reflects that between the two of them. So the point I'm really trying to make here is like what's going on with Metaplanet is not like a usual common stock or a common story or a common price performance within a 1 year period of time. This is a very, very special situation. And I think comparing that to MicroStrategy or pricing them in pricing one with the other is really a tough comparison because they are just at different stages of their growth trajectory.
Yeah, definitely a very special story coming out of Japan. Adam, is there anything? And guys, just grab the mic, then we don't have to listen to me here.
Yeah, I agree with Ryan 100%. And I think the exciting thing that we all got to really realize that we're in the middle of is you think about MSTR, they were the first one, they're the king, nobody will catch them. And then as we've seen the other treasury companies slowly but surely eke their way into the marketplace, you're really starting to see that, essentially, you're starting to see that, sorry guys, I lost my train of thought. I'm overly caffeinated right now.
No, I fully support that. I just want you to know that I fully support your over caffeination. As soon as you're back, you just jump in. I have the issue of like, I can just run the mouth. But if you got it, you jump in. Otherwise, I will say that what we are touching upon here, which Ryan started, is what I find so super fascinating. Like we understand LBEs can generate, they grow faster than they go.
So I have it back, Anders, if you don't mind. So what I was trying to say is that there's something called the Goldilocks zone, right? Where you talk about like habitable life in a small part of the observable universe. And I view that as a metaphor for the Bitcoin treasury companies. You have a lot of questions about these treasury companies as they get started. You ask about the regulatory environments. You ask about a foreign capital environment that you don't really have, that you don't really know, and you have to educate yourself on. Metaplanet is now slightly over a year into the game, and we've seen a year of proven execution that is just remarkably exciting. And I think that what we're seeing is a very rapid transformation in the public marketplace's education about the potential. And this is going to be the clear number two. I think that like we've led the narrative in education about what the potential is. And like you're going to continue to see that with these treasury companies. There's going to be a period of time where a lot of questions arise about their ability to execute. And Metaplanet is just now rounding the corner where people are really growing confidence in this stock. So I agree with Ryan, and I think that the potential for this is massive.
So, but when you say that's interesting, I mean, I agree with you that this will likely be a clear number two. But then we have Capital 21, and they already have or are going to start with 40,000 Bitcoin. So how do you figure that? You don't expect them to be able to pull off the same speed?
Well,
I will.
The question is that it's just all comes to BTC yield, and if Metaplanet has 11,071 sats per share and Semler has 28,423, you're getting the bigger players just not even being able to move nearly as quick. And ultimately, if you're an investor, the ultimate game is getting a % return. It's betting on the fastest horse. Right. And you're going to continue to see that there's going to be a huge market need for educating the investor base on who can be the fastest moving players in this space. And, you have Metaplanet, you have the blockchain group. If you look at sats per share, those are the two smallest players in the game right now. You have Cooler, you have a couple others, but in terms of the narrative, in terms of the overall investor understanding, Metaplanet is just leading the race right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I do want to, because of that, just share share the screen. Brian, if you want to grab the mic there while I do the screen share.
Sure. And I've actually got a broader thesis about these international companies in general, that I don't think they're all competing for the same pools of capital. There's this temptation to put them all on the same global top 10 leaderboard, and I don't really think that's the right way to look at it. I think there's going to be there's going to be like the U.S. leaderboard, with it has, maybe the top 2 companies with, strategy obviously at the top, maybe 21 at the second place, and then potentially that looks like what that largely looks like what the global leaderboard looks like. But then these other companies, they're not necessarily competing on the same playing field. Metaplanet is competing for number 1 in Japan. There's other companies like Smarter Web Company, they're competing for number 1 in the UK. And as these roll out to these different markets, it's an entirely different investor base that is, like I say, it's not necessarily competing for the same pool of capital. So I think there's going to be room for many of these different stories to play out. And I think the people like us who are invested in Metaplanet are actually very much in the minority as U.S. investors, international investors looking at these foreign companies. So it's very interesting from that perspective.
I agree. And the fascinating thing is that you're going to see the first companies to plant a flag in a particular nation get to sell the nationalization story. If you're thinking macro scale on the long term, if you intertwine like a Maple strategy in Canada or a Matador in Canada, you have 1 or 2 companies that are able to plant the flag first. That's going to be able to sell a very powerful narrative to the national story of being the first in any particular country. So I couldn't agree more, Brian.
Yeah, I think that's exactly very interesting, Brian, or the case, basically the truth, that in US now you have 10 plus companies offering LPE capital products to the market. It's not about having the most Bitcoin, then you have a monopoly. The product that's being sold is LPE products like preferred stocks. And in Japan, Metaplanet has a monopoly. Strategy does not have a monopoly in US. And it's probably the same we're going to see in different regions play out across the world. Climb, do you have any thoughts on that you want to share, or anything else you want to jump in with?
Yeah, for me, it comes down to potential and trajectory. And potential, one of the biggest variables is going to be size here. Bitcoin yield, you need a long runway to be able to, let's say, 10x your starting position, in Bitcoin per share. So with something like XXI, it's very interesting and they may do very well. The problem that they're going to run into is that they're starting off, being fairly large in their Bitcoin holdings with zero history for you to be able to extrapolate into the future. So personally, I like the mix that Metaplanet gives of a lot of history while still having less than 10,000 Bitcoin right now, and a lot of potential.
Amen to that. Ryan.
Yeah, I think this idea of comparing different Bitcoin treasury companies, and this has come up already, I think that's a very tough assignment to do, right? In comparing the differentiators or lack thereof for some of these companies, or what the geographies are, or what the various growth rates are. I think the 21 story is far more complicated, right? Both with the base effect of starting at 42,000 Bitcoin, plus I'm not really seeing much of a differentiator for them. And then you have to compare them against strategy at this point, given their starting size. And there's just no conceivable argument to be made, or that I've heard yet, let's say, as to why 21 should have a higher Bitcoin credit rating than MicroStrategy, or why would the market prefer convertible bonds or preferred fixed income securities coming from 21 instead of strategy. But Anders, I think you said strategy does not have a monopoly in the US, and I would like to
on the preferred they do so far, yes, if that's what your point.
What was that?
Yeah, on preferred stock they actually do, right?
I think on preferred stock, I think on the moat, the amount of Bitcoin that they have relative to all of the other companies, I mean, they're going to end up with a majority market share in the US. So yeah, I would say they're kind of a global monopoly, if anything, to be honest.
No, there's some good points in that, and they are the only ones, like Strike, Stride, and Strife they're the only ones selling those products right now. You guys have any thoughts on Metaplanet's the registration in US and Florida, and they're opening up an office in Miami? What do you expect to see come out of that, Adam?
Well, I think the options market with a 350 vol asset's going to attract some serious capital. I want to sell some covered calls on something like that. Those premiums would be juicy. I just think it's going to open the doors. The stock's not even tradable on Robinhood right now. You're seeing it's like the number one stock traded, particularly in Japan, but the volume coming from the other markets is just insane for an over-the-counter stock. So you're going to see a lot of price discovery and the Americans just understanding the narrative behind this. And, it's going to be in tandem with Strategy's S&P inclusion. You're going to see Saylor be on Joe Rogan after being on Jordan Peterson. There's just a huge narrative that's unfolding right now. And I don't know, you're just going to see price discovery happen with Metaplanet, with these other companies, and a listing in the NASDAQ is going to really wake up the normie investor class. So, it's going to be tremendously exciting.
Couldn't agree more. Brian.
Yeah, one of the interesting things we're seeing with the OTC ticker right now is that it already tends to lead the price of the Japanese ticker. And if they get a NASDAQ listed ADR, that's just going to accelerate. And, obviously if we get the options market, that'll be very interesting. I both love and don't love the options market though, because one of the things that's cool about the stock right now is that there really aren't any derivatives trading around it, so you can get these huge blow off tops. And if you try to trade it all, they're fun to try to trade. Obviously, it's not for everybody. And if we get derivatives markets built up around Metaplanet, that will probably round off some of those edges a little bit. But I would imagine the stock would still be pretty volatile, and the options market would be extremely popular.
I bet it would. Climb, you've had a lot of success in the option markets before. That's kind of how you created your base, right, through call options and strategy. Your thoughts there?
Yeah. I mean, I love options. I love thinking about options, just the math behind it, the potential, whatever, if you can identify a stock that you think could 5X, then you could end up with an option that could 100X potentially, if you're in the right place and the right time. And that's roughly what happened to me, sort of. It was a little messier than that. But I will warm up to the idea of Metaplanet having options in the future. I like the potential there. But I also like the piece of not having to worry about theta decay, IV crush and all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too, like what Adam said, which I find to be very interesting, if and when the day comes, and I bet it will, it's just a matter of time. We actually went through this with Semler last year, like figuring out like what is the criteria needed to have an options market. I think the one thing that held up Semler for quite some time was having 2,000 individual shareholders. I think over time, and there's 4 other main pieces of criteria you need, but that seems to be the big and final one. And I'm sure over time we'll explode past that 2,000 individual shareholder number. But the ability to sell covered calls, right, on a 200, 300 vol asset means someone can sell like deep out of the money covered calls, like 100% out of the money, and really feel good about, hey, if the shares get called away at that price, or like this is where options can be used to lock in scenarios where it's like, hey, I'm okay selling a percentage of my Metaplanet stack in exchange for receiving income. So I think that's, of course, very compelling. But I see what Klein is saying about the theta decay on the long side for long options. I actually do have a question for the group kind of here about the Miami office. Of course, I see the excitement around expanding this to America, really engaging with American capital markets investors. And I think Miami is really the best spot to be in for that. Saylor's also in Miami, but even without the Saylor piece there, it does seem like Miami was becoming something of a Bitcoin hub. But outside of that, what are we really hoping to accomplish with opening the Miami, Florida office and expanding into America?
I'm guessing preferred stocks as well, but what's that they want to offer fixed income products like Strategy is already doing. I don't know. What are your thoughts? The rest of the panel here.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I think one thing they don't really have right now is the ability to raise capital in U.S. markets. The OTC volume helps them, but they can't directly raise off of that. It's only indirectly insofar as that it helps them sell shares into the Japanese market. So if they get the ADR listed on NASDAQ, they get a presence set up here, then that helps them potentially tap the U.S. capital markets. I have to think that's what the long range plan is. But it's still very early stages, so we'll see how long it takes to get that set up. But yeah, I have to think it's all about setting up a way to tap into U.S. capital markets.
So, Brian, are you saying it is to aid getting listed on NASDAQ? That it's not possible to get bumped up to NASDAQ without having an office here, or is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, there's different things they could do, and if they had a NASDAQ listed ADR, they could just open up an ATM in the United States and sell shares that way. I can't really think of all the ways they could raise capital, but just if they want to go start talking to people on Wall Street to do convertible bonds in the United States or whatever it is they might want to do, then having that U.S. presence with the NASDAQ cross listing will help them achieve that.
It's tough to speculate on the particulars of how they would do that. That said, the United States has 65 to 70% of all the equity capital in the entire world. So at the end of the day, this is where the money is. You can trust them to find the particulars for capital raising. But at the end of the day, if you're planting the flag here, the potential is just massive.
I get all that. And I really hope they do try and launch preferred securities in Japan as well. Going off of what Brian said, these folks like to buy local, whether it's buying consumer goods or buying equities or their investments. And Japan is the second largest equity market in the world. We can say, of course, the majority of equity capital is in the West, which I'm sure that is true, but I'm just so bullish on this Japanese setup. You know what I mean? It seems like there's so many yield-starved investors, especially in Japan, because they've had zero interest rate policy for some time now, and a lot of issues with the Bank of Japan intervening or not intervening to defend the currency or keep interest rates pegged at a certain point. So even just the way I look at it is the US can be a cherry on top or a potential future catalyst for raising more and more funds, but I'm so bullish on Japan too.
100%. And the cool thing about a preferred credit instrument they could offer in Japan is that they wouldn't have to offer a 10 or an 8% yields. They could do much less than that and still see incredible demand just based on, what the population gets right now. So 100%, you can be bullish on the Japanese market without even putting the U.S. market into play here. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, that should just if they can lend money, borrow money cheaper than Strategy in U.S. I guess it can only add to the speed of the flywheel. Klein, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm pretty confident they'll do it. At some point. Maybe that's within the next year or so. And there's a couple cool things there. One, I haven't modeled any of this. This is not part of their 555 plan. All the bullishness there, I'm not taking it into account. The U.S. subsidiary, that's just a bonus thing that is going to obviously provide value, probably in multiple ways. So I just kind of summarize that in my head. I just compartmentalize that as hey, that's icing. I'm not worried about that yet. And the preferreds are, to me, I don't have a perfect understanding of it, but I really think about it just as a spread between the Bitcoin CAGR and the yield that you have to pay. Obviously, as the years go on, I think that probably becomes less important for torque, but at least early on, that's super important.
Yeah. I want to just real quick have a look at, because I think this, what we started talking about, or Ryan, you started touching upon, is since Metaplanet became interesting in April for U.S. investors as well, where a lot of us are situated, this whole thing of which LBE should I be investing in, how should I split it, what am I chasing, I think is one of the most interesting discussions right now, or it's going through everyone's head, what to focus on and where to allocate their funds. And that's why I just wanted to to bring this up because there's a comparison, if nothing else, of Strategy and Metaplanet and AltBG, which I consider the three most interesting. Semra and Cholera, not so much right now. And I think what people are looking for is the BTC yield, right? The higher BTC yield you have, the faster the growth is in Bitcoin per stock, and that's what you want as an investor. And when you're looking at, and I think the quarter to date, because AltBG started in the beginning of the year, so they have a very high, came from a very low number in the beginning of the year. If we just look at what's the speed right now, we're almost 2.5 months into the quarter. Then looking at Strategy, they have a quarter to date BTC yield of 5.5%, Metaplanet of 66%, and AltBG, the blockchain group, on 48%. And I think that then spills over, and I'm just presenting the thesis, want to hear you guys' opinion afterwards. That spills over to people being willing to pay more to have the faster horse. And that's why when you're looking at the NAV premium, we're seeing Strategy at 1.92, Metaplanet at MNAV or NAV premium at 8.46, and then the blockchain group at around 10.5. These numbers may not be super precise. It's difficult to run a site like this and pull data from all different places. But just an overall ballpark. What are you guys' thoughts on this whole process of all of you are going through the thoughts of where should I put my LBE funds?
I can answer kind of Carl's question here in the chat because it kind of goes along your lines, Anders. He says, explain how exactly Metaplanet got their BTC yield so high. Just think of this, guys. It's a lot easier to go from 1 to 2 than it is from 500 to 1,000, but that's the same percentage return. So that's the advantage that the small players have. At the end of the day, like if you're talking about acquiring BTC per share, getting that BTC yield, it's much easier to go to fast pace. And, this is reflective in Adam Back's MNAV months to cover metric. It's literally just describing how long it takes through pure BTC per share accretion, to cover the premium that the stock is trading at. So if Metaplanet's trading at an 8x MNAV, but they're going to burn off the premium in just a matter of months, the stock can still seem relatively cheap because after that certain amount of months, it's all just upside from there. Anything that you have invested is just pure upside after that point in time. So hopefully that clears things up for the people asking, where should I put my funds? Well, if you want a higher percent return, the fastest horse is the one that you bet on.
Yeah, I want to add to that, though, that Metaplanet, because they have a second longest track record, they started April last year. They didn't come off 0 or 4 Bitcoin or something like that in January. I think their year-to-date yield of 225% is just, screaming at us compared to Strategy's 17% yield, and definitely the quarter to date. Ryan.
Yeah, so one quick housekeeping note. My 18-month-old nephew's in the other room crying up a storm. So if you hear that, it's that's him. But yeah, so I think I think we've touched on a few of these points here, but having the numbers up here really helps to bring it home. For the purpose of this, let me just drop Semler and Cooler because they are still very much running their underlying business, right? For Semler, it's, a medical tech healthcare device business. For Cooler, I honestly don't even really know what they do. I believe it's something in robotics, but the point is both of those companies are still very much pushing forward with their, legacy business, let's call it, whereas Strategy, Metaplanet, and the blockchain group are really positioning themselves as being Bitcoin pure plays. And if we look at this, so the smallest of those three in market cap is the blockchain group. And unsurprisingly, they have the highest, Bitcoin yield numbers, especially on the year-to-date stuff. So this is where the comparisons get tricky, right? Not just because of the geography, but also because the various sizes. I think a way to kind of not necessarily counter the Bitcoin yield idea, but to add a layer of context to the Bitcoin yield, it's really the Bitcoin dollar gain right? Which, Strategy pioneered that as a new KPI. And some of us, myself included, do think of that as earnings in the traditional sense for equities. And that's how you can get size. So maybe you can think of, Bitcoin yield as a speed indicator, but Bitcoin dollar gain is a size indicator. And it's just a matter of how you want to combine those two numbers to see what does an allocation make sense for the individual.
Gotcha. But you're right that the blockchain group have a very high yield for the year. They started in early this year, but what I think stands out here is Metaplanet actually having a higher quarter to date yield than the blockchain group, despite having been at it since April last year. I think that's a very strong in favor of Metaplanet. I have a small position in blockchain group, just disclaimer, but Metaplanet is, and Strategy is my biggest holdings.
Yeah, one thing I might add to that is that we touched on size, we touched on BTC yield, we touched on MNAV cover, and I think that broadly, the speed of Bitcoin acquisition is something that people are really trying to get a handle on right now, and there's a few different metrics being floated. And Adam, I know you put out a new metric too. I think it was the PVC, and another thing on top of that I've been thinking about is what is the total addressable market for each of these companies, because like I said earlier, they're not playing the same pools of capital. The potential market that Strategy is selling into, if they're actually able to capture 1% of the fixed income market, that's very massive. When I think about how fast they could grow, it's constrained by the size of the market they're trying to grow into. Metaplanet is somewhat constrained by the size of the Japanese market. And so that's another aspect I'm thinking about, especially with these international ones, is what is the size of the marketplace they're in? Where are they in their growth trajectory? Where could they be if they saturate the market? And what does that growth look like? Because it's probably something like a logarithmic growth curve that tops out around whatever the market potential is. So those are just broadly some ways I'm trying to frame the issue.
I like that. Interesting. Climb, you want to add something to this? Because I know you're Metaplanet only. That's where your focus is.
Yeah, and a lot of that is, you look at Metaplanet, they've announced in the last 14 months 36 different Bitcoin purchases. So like if you look at the log chart of their Bitcoin holdings or their Bitcoin per share, it's extremely clean. So if you had like 6 months ago tried to go off of where they had been already with their first, just let's call it 18 Bitcoin purchases, you would have been able to predict pretty well where they'd be today. And that's what I need. And Metaplanet is more copying what Strategy is doing as far as an ATM-like structure, benefiting more from even a higher relative MNAV. And to me, the speed, the yield that they produce, an analogy I just thought of, I don't know if this will work, maybe. So if you imagine a wheel, and if you imagine MNAV being the diameter of the wheel, and if you imagine volume or turnover rate, like how many shares they trade a day relative to their total share count, as the RPM, basically what they're able to dilute, how fast they can dilute in the market. That's really the speed of that yield. And Metaplanet has it, so they can dilute their shares 20% in 11 trading days, and everyone loves it. At a high MNAV. So
no complaining of Dylan and Simon hitting the ATM there in that's massive. That's a big numbers of dilution, but sure helps with that high MNAV. That means they can buy a lot of Bitcoin when they do it.
Yeah, and on that point, Bitcoin yield truly is a function of MNAV, right? The higher the MNAV, the more accretive that either ATM or moving strike warrant will end up being. And so with there being a seemingly insatiable appetite to own more and more Metaplanet, not just in Japan, but also in the US, and since we've seen the MNAV has not only not collapsed, but it's hung in there. I missed it on the screen. I think maybe in the ballpark of like 8, and we've kind of been ranging at 4, 6, 8 in that ballpark.
Which one were you looking for?
Metaplanet, about 8.5. So if you think about, an 8.5x MNAV versus what Strategy was doing, selling shares, all the way really down to about 1.8x MNAV, you're getting roughly 4x more accretion in Bitcoin per share terms through Metaplanet because they're able to sustain a much higher MNAV. So that is a very compelling setup here.
Absolutely.
We all want Simon and Dylan to sell $1 bills for $8 and get more Bitcoin at the end of the day.
Right.
Absolutely. So I just quickly touch upon, because several people in the chat and also before the show mentioned to talk about if we could cover the tax implications that some thought has been appearing. So I just want to say real quick, we're not going to spend too much time on it here unless the panel wants to, because there's too much firepower, I think, to talk about what likely is just FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and nothing to worry about. I don't think there's anyone here that can solve it or have the final answer. So I would say just watch for posts on X about it. And I've just seen FUD so many times, and it people want it. Once that's created, they want, it just sucks a lot of the airtime and actual constructive discussion out of what should be constructive discussion. But if you guys want to add anything, otherwise I'll just say let's watch for X in the answers on that. But I think it's a nothing burger.
I just think it's too soon to tell. From what I've learned over the past 7 years or so, when you're investing in highly innovative companies or assets like Bitcoin, there's going to be so much to keep learning along the way. I'd learned a ton about, manufacturing and engineering and supply chains from Tesla. It was a constant learning experience. The MicroStrategy example, like I was saying before we went live, I had really never understood the structure or even perhaps the purpose of a convertible bond. But then once, MicroStrategy said we're going to start selling convertible bonds, it was okay, now's the time to learn this. And I think that's a piece of humility that's largely lost on most of financial Twitter, where everyone wants to position themselves as being an all-knowing expert. The reality is much more that we're all learning this stuff together in real time. So that's point number one. Point number two is that there is real FUD campaigns that do happen online. And again, I think, the new thing that we're learning here is, this is the first time I've ever invested in a non-US based company. So is there a chance that this PFIC thing is real? Yes. Is it worth looking into and learning more about? Of course, yes. But I think to Anders's point, there are coordinated FUD attacks, and this also could be that. But I very much think it's worth looking into.
Absolutely. And the answer will come on X, I believe,
Sure.
Unless some of you have any thoughts on any of that, Adam, Klein, Brian. Otherwise, we can hit it on to the.
I'm not a tax professional. Let's do a disclaimer. I don't think any of us are. That said, I do classify at least half of it as FUD. I was seeing some talk about forced unrealized gains taxes, and I was seeing literally sentences of totally wrong misinterpretation of the tax law. And, I chimed in last night, and I had probably 10 to 15 people immediately read my words and misconstrue it. I used the term defer taxes, and then they made the point saying well, you might be misinterpreting tax law because you're not telling people that they'll have to pay the taxes eventually, even though that's what the word defer actually means. So this is a really gray area where we shouldn't really comment in too much detail. I feel like consult a tax professional. At the end of the day, I have seen some misinformation on this, but is it up to us to really wade through that with people? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I think.
So I see the chat getting lit up with people saying that Simon posted about it. I don't know if it's the same post we saw before we started the show, but yeah, I think they're looking into it. They're going to tell us more about it.
Yeah,
I don't see any point in us digging into it until they do their own official announcements.
Perfect closure on that, Brian. Thank you very much. And we ended up anyway spending like 5-6 minutes on it, which was more than I wanted to. But that's cool. It is a concern. But Climb, you're probably deeper in the data on Metaplanet than all of us here. I mean, these guys are very much so, but you are. You're very deep, and it's the only thing the company mainly you focus on. What excites you about the most about Metaplanet right now, or what are people not aware of or talking about that they maybe should pay attention to?
Yeah, so if you go to like bitcointreasuries.net, they have I think kind of the page that lands you on is just the ranking of in order of how many Bitcoin public treasury companies have. And, of course, Strategies is, way in the lead, right? And Metaplanet was number 11. They passed Block. Now they're number 10. They passed Block with their last purchase like a week or so ago. And I think they'll probably be fifth in like 4 to 6 weeks. Probably, sometime in July, they'll be in fifth place because there's so many like miners, Teslas in there too, like Coinbase, that just aren't really stacking, or they're messing around with Fartcoin. Like that's not going to help you. So, we're about to be fifth place from 10th in a very, very short order. And I think that's going to help bring a lot of attention to this as well. And then, just the plan is insanely bullish. And I think they'll probably do it in quicker than their sort of 6 to 10 month, guidance.
Yeah. The point I really like that you brought up there is that once they really climb very high, it just helps bring more attention to Metaplanet. Although I would say it's been spreading like wildfire on X. I checked the other day, when did I actually buy my first Metaplanet, which was May 2nd. I would say anyone buying Metaplanet or any other LB pretty much just back in April, like just 2 months ago, is like an LBE OG, like when it comes to outside of strategy. I think, Climb, you entered the trade in April when you did a lot of your work. It's funny how fast things are going.
Yeah, and I think there's perhaps a distinction to be made here. I was on the phone with a friend and a business partner last night, and he was referencing a Simon speech that he gave recently. And Simon was suggesting, or perhaps predicting that this time next year we might have 1,000 Bitcoin treasury companies. But I think it's worth drawing like a firm line in the sand between, Tesla, for example, and Metaplanet or Strategy, right? Like some people are kind of, tourists. They have some Bitcoin, but I would be shocked, like jaw dropped on the ground, shocked if Tesla ever made another Bitcoin purchase. So yeah, there's going to be some companies who hold Bitcoin, but I think when we're thinking about that screen that was up there, Strategy, Metaplanet, and the blockchain group are kind of like pure plays. So I think we almost need like two lists of like the pure play, aggressive, only focused on growing Bitcoin per share, those companies, and then everyone else.
I agree. Like Marathon, for a short moment, I thought, oh, wait, are they going to try and run the playbook? And they weren't. So it just doesn't matter. Like I'm interested in the ones that are focused on this business model, not a very, very tough business model like mining. They're the ones that, yeah, in full agreement there.
If you see somebody comparing GameStop with the blockchain group, probably got to jump in and draw a line in the sand. So you're right, Ryan.
Yeah, GameStop, I guess, with what we saw at the Vegas conference, the interview, I mean, they're simply not running the playbook, right? They're approaching it a little bit like if they're a Tesla, Marathon, whatever. Like their focus is somewhere else. It's not running the playbook, and the playbook is why we're here. That is what can generate it. It does seem to be by far the most value producing for shareholders business in the world right now, and has been really since Strategy started it. It just happens to be a few more choices now. Brian, do you have any thoughts there?
I don't really have anything to add to that, but I see quite a few questions in the chat about the relationship to Nakamoto, so that might be interesting to touch on briefly.
Sure.
And I think a lot of people still haven't quite put the whole puzzle together, but basically there is a venture capital fund called UTXO Management, and they are behind a lot of the newer international LVs that we are seeing, Metaplanet included. It was the first one that they backed. Both Tyler Evans and David Bailey, who co-founded UTXO Management, sit on the board at Metaplanet. They are co-founders of also of Nakamoto. Basically, what Nakamoto is going to be is a public company that ultimately acquires BTC Inc., which also owns UTXO Management. And so basically the relationship will be that Metaplanet is one of the portfolio companies underneath UTXO Management that will ultimately be underneath Nakamoto after all their mergers and acquisitions are complete.
So how do people evaluate that as shareholders and try and figure out, because it's already complicated with we got the MNAV, we got the BTC yield, and now they're buying different entities like that. And are they stacking as well on their own balance sheet, and they're selling stock themselves? They themselves have an MNAV. Like how are people going to go about evaluating a holding company that is also running the playbook, but holding companies running the playbook?
We don't exactly have all the pieces yet. So I think that they're both going to be running the strategies themselves. They're going to be stacking their own Bitcoin. But the goal isn't going to be just stacking more and more Bitcoin. It's going to be funding these LBs in new markets. And so probably the way to value it would be some combination of Bitcoin holdings plus exposure to these LBs that they're funding. But it's very tricky to value right now because we don't actually know what that exposure is, and we won't know until those numbers are made public. But probably, sum of parts type approach like that is going to be the way to value it. But we'll see once we have all the numbers.
I think there's also tremendous value and utility in owning such a high percentage of the Bitcoin media infrastructure. That's a huge advantage to Nakamoto. We'll see what that looks like over the next year, but tremendously powerful structure.
Oh, so I didn't know. So I did on this channel, on my YouTube channel, and it goes out also live on X at the same time. I also do a show called MSTR Mondays. It used to be called MicroStrategy Mondays. Nevertheless, and yesterday I did actually on a Monday do a MSTR Monday, and I was covering also a little bit there SWC. I wasn't aware that it was a UTXO management company, but that makes it a little bit more interesting in terms of my expectations of the execution. Just wanted to add that. I don't know if anybody want to add to that.
So the blockchain group is also a UTXO management company, also Liquid, Matador, and I feel like there's another one that I'm forgetting. But a lot of these newer ones that people are talking about are all underneath the UTXO management umbrella. And David Bailey says he thinks these companies are going to get a UTXO management premium or Nakamoto premium, and I think that's probably the case because they've got international team of experts to tap into and roll out best practices to all the companies that they work with. It's a very different proposition than an unknown, unvetted company spinning up an LBE where you know nothing about the management team or their commitment to the strategy.
No, absolutely. And so do you own Nakamoto yourself, Brian?
I do have a position in Nakamoto, yes.
Okay. What about Adam and RyQuant? I know you don't climb.
I don't yet, no, but I think, Brian, I'm not sure if you mentioned Moon Inc., but that really ties into planting the flag in any particular capital pool. That's another tremendous opportunity. And you have the UTXO guys. I think that they're really onto something. They're kind of front running everybody else wanting to implement the strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the ticker that I couldn't think of. So thanks for bringing that up. I think they were really early to this idea. They saw the huge success with Metaplanet in Japan and said, hey, let's take this to every market in the world, which I think is an amazing idea because there's all these other pools of capital out there. There are bond funds in Japan that can only invest in, Japanese bonds or Japanese stocks.
And what we're watching, so Metaplanet also is a UTXO investment, right? Or associated company, correct? Like David Bailey, I believe, is on the board of Metaplanet.
Yeah, that's correct.
And they definitely are killing it. And I guess it feels like what we're watching right now is just the dam of all of the capital that is yield starved around the world is breaking, and this will be the way that it's flooding into Bitcoin, and it's going to help bring about hyper Bitcoinization, which will be great for Bitcoin and great for humanity. Should be no doubt of that. At least there's not in my mind. Klein, is there something you want to add here? Some thoughts you have on this discussion, or in general?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about the really small companies. Like, for me, if you're a small company and if you start with like 10 Bitcoin, I'm not gonna spend hours of research on you because I could go out and buy 10 Bitcoin. So it's really hard to figure that out. No history, but they have tons of potential. So like 0 on the history. So there's nothing to extrapolate, but tons of potential and association. So some people are gonna do research and pick winners. Some people are going to do research, pick losers. I don't think everyone wins. I don't think that's a very realistic outcome. Generally in trading, that's not all the altcoins won in 2017. So not to compare these two highly altcoins, but still there's a lot of tickers that are popping up, and they're going to be fighting for attention, fighting for volume, and volume is really, really necessary depending on their business model. I mean, if you look at ways to increase Bitcoin per share, I don't know the number, but I think I think I was able to add up like 8 different ways that you can do it, creative dilution with shares being one, and like preferreds and convertible bonds and all that. So a lot of these are trying new strategies, and until I really see it work, it's hard for me to know like what that's going to look like, what the speed's going to look like.
And to your point, Klein, you are 100% Metaplanet. And to your point, yeah. So they, as you said, they have 36 Bitcoin purchases. They have the second longest track record, and the track record is just amazing. It's a straight line, more or less, on a log chart. They're really headed to the moon, and even when you compare it to these smaller ones, at least the blockchain group, they still have been outperforming in Q2 so far. So I would say that the higher certainty we're getting because of that track record, and still just currently being the fastest horse in the race, except maybe someone that started in the quarter. A lot of things really speak for Metaplanet, and I just want to make sure that point is clear. That they're killing it, and they seem to continue to kill it, and I'm very happy for my Metaplanet position. Just want to add that. I don't know if anybody else want to touch upon that.
I would like to get an opinion from you guys, if you don't mind, because we kind of touched on it briefly earlier. I would love to know your thoughts. So, Klein, you just talked a lot about these companies competing for attention, competing for volume, and you're only going to see that increase tenfold if we see 1,000 of these companies pop up over the next year. Like, so what do you guys think will distinguish these companies in terms of having an operating business? Like, Ryan, you were talking a lot about, there's 2 different groups, the LBEs that have an operating business. There's the ones that don't. How do you guys see that playing out in a bear market? And how do you think that these guys will distinguish each other? Are they going to be public about relying on cash flow? Any thoughts on that kind of domain would be interesting to hear.
That is such a fascinating question, something I have to think on more. I think there's probably a few schools of thought one could take on this. One could say less is more, and I think that's the camp that I'm in. Or one could also say, these other things that they have going on, ways of generating cash flow, could be downside protection in a bear market. I do want to think on this more. But for me, as it pertains to things like, Nakamoto, and I am trying to be very diplomatic now, public facing, so I'm not going to spread any FUD or anything like that. But for me, I'm just really focused on, the MicroStrategy playbook, right? Like, who has the capacity to create financial engineering innovation in order to raise as much money as quickly as possible in the most efficient way to roll that into Bitcoin. So when you start talking about all these like other countries that are essentially going to be like rolled up into the UTXO or Nakamoto umbrella, For me personally, I don't really think I need that basket exposure, because I'll fine tune and sift through them myself, pick the ones I like, and I really want to keep that number at like 2, just MicroStrategy and Metaplanet. So yeah, I don't know, but Adam, I want to think about that more, about the bear market stuff, which is like the optimal path.
Yeah, Adam, my thought on that is like, I think if things get closer to a blow off top, people are going to go heavier on the risk side, which in this space is going to associate itself with the smaller companies, smaller market cap companies, sort of similar altcoins, right? And then the opposite's going to happen in the bull market. People are going to in the bear market, people are going to go to quality. And I think quality looks like strategy, and I think quality looks like Metaplanet. And Metaplanet's staying power with their option strategy is really awesome. Like, they don't have to dip into anything. They just keep pulling volatility, making money off the volatility of Bitcoin directly. And that's just a snowball that keeps increasing every quarter.
I want to interrupt with, so I saw this morning, when this has been planned since last week, that Dylan actually has just gone live with his spaces on X to discuss the plan. I'd love to have all of you guys back again in next week and in the future in general. But what are your thoughts? Should we end it here, and then we can go and listen to Dylan, potentially ask questions there from some of you guys, or what's your thoughts?
I could use the refresher on the 555, but I'm
Yep.
happy to do whatever the group wants to do.
So, any objections against that? Otherwise, I think that would be probably the cutting edge signal right now, would be to go. As much as I hate to end this conversation, because I think you guys are awesome and bring so much knowledge, but what do you guys say?
I don't think we want to make people choose between us and Dylan.
So let's go choose Dylan. Thank you everyone for watching. This show does come out every Tuesday, more or less 9 a.m. At least this was the second one, at 9 a.m. PST. I do also MST on Mondays on this channel, where I cover strategy and also dive a little bit into the others, like we've done today. Thank you guys, Climb, RyQuant, Adam, and Brian, so much for being here and making this a great show with lots of knowledge. And let's go watch Dylan. Thank you for being here, guys. And thank you for everyone watching, 7,000 almost live viewers.
Thanks. Awesome.
All right.
Yeah.
See you in space.